Welcome to the Unlist, episode 55, because like Sammy Hagar, I can't drive 55. Although actually I can't drive any speed because I don't have a license. So, the curious case of concentrate. What is that? What is all this nonsense that we see with these older fragrances having these non-standardized concentrations? I feel like most of you out there know what an eau de cologne, an eau de toilette, an eau de parfum are, etc., etc. So I don't need to give you that lesson here. I could do that in a later series of videos. I can bring my Fragrance 101 series from Instagram over here, redo it in shorter videos, whatever. But for right now, we are going down the really obscure tangent rabbit hole. The thing that I notice brings some of you people out of the woodwork, your ears perk up, and you get a little more interested in my videos. When I talk about things that people elsewhere in the online space on YouTube don't discuss, topics that aren't picked up by the bigger influencer types, because obviously they're all about numbers, right? They want to make numbers. And talking about non-standard concentrations that no longer exist, well, they don't bring in numbers, do they? Right? They don't. But that's why you're here. That's why you love it. So here we go. For the most part, these non-standardized concentrations are just really bad market reactions. They are brands caught flat-footed, needing to figure out how to gain an edge and get people interested in the fragrances. So we can go case by case. I think that's probably the easiest one. The most known one, of course, that most of y'all, again, probably don't need to be told, but I'll keep it short here, is the whole idea of men's cologne. Why were things in particularly Anglophone countries, so like US, Canada, UK, Australia, why were the men's fragrances labeled cologne in those territories where elsewhere, like in most of Europe, they were the proper concentration listed? So if they were a cologne, then yes, they were a cologne. A cologne is a cologne is a cologne. But if they were an eau de toilette, they were still called cologne over here or elsewhere. Why is that? Well, there's a lot that can be said about that. But the Cliff Notes version is the first fragrances that English-speaking men tended to find comfort in using were actual colognes. So think 4711, think Castle Macy No. 6, think Marion Lanham's Florida Water, think stuff like that, okay? Think Farina, okay? Atkinson's English Lavender, so on and so forth. Those are all colognes. So the idea was, let's keep it comfortable, okay? These guys are going to freak out if they see the words eau de toilette on a bottle of fragrance, because women didn't seem to care. So there were already women's fragrances, or just non-declarative gender-wise fragrances like Shalimar and such, that were already in the market labeled as eau de toilette. So guys would be scared if they saw it. And that ended up being true. I mean, there were cases where there would be a brand that would just put eau de toilette and release it in like the US market. And guys were like, what is that? Is that for men? And they're like, okay, so it says men on it, but then it says eau de toilette. So I'm confused. It's almost like one cancels the other. They're mutually exclusive. One cancels the other one out. So that's why they had to walk on eggshells. Eventually, though, I think the English got over themselves first, because we started seeing toilet water appear more frequently on English fragrances. And then Australia followed suit, and then Canada. America was the last one to come to its senses. It took the United States all the way until like probably the 90s, early 2000s for some brands to finally ditch the cologne thing for men and perfume. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, that whole thing. It took almost to the 21st century for us over here in the good old US of A, yeehaw. So that answers that question. Now the next one is going to be, what's the whole deal with eau de toilette concentrate or haute concentration? And now all of these fragrances, if they still exist, some of them are discontinued, are now called eau de parfum. A very famous, notable example of that is the Chanel Pour Monsieur eau de toilette concentrate, introduced in 1989. It is now, as of 2014, known as Chanel Pour Monsieur eau de parfum. What is the deal? Are they different fragrances? No, they're not. Because eau de toilette concentrate was used for much the same reason that men's cologne was. So you see, this argument flips on its side. Once you take it over to Europe, in Europe, men were comfortable with eau de toilette because men had had eau de toilette since like the early 20th century. People in France, Belgium, wherever, Germany, were comfortable with a man's fragrance being labeled as eau de toilette. However, once you put the word parfum on the bottle, all bets were off. So, just like in the United States, you couldn't put eau de toilette on the bottle because the man would flip out, so it had to be cologne. Likewise, in Europe, you couldn't put eau de parfum on the bottle, or else the man would question, what is this? Is this for me or not? So the workaround was a concentrated eau de toilette, an eau de toilette concentrate, right? Or haute concentration, which makes it sound even more powerful, right? When you Anglicize those things, you get stuff like super cologne, which Estee Lauder had a handful of those. So super colognes, Aramis super cologne, which was really just eau de toilette, but so it's basically an eau de parfum. So you're taking an eau de parfum, and you can't call it an eau de toilette concentrate because eau de toilette doesn't exist. So they got to go a step lower and go, okay, eau de parfum, super cologne. Now, oddly enough, there were some women's market super colognes too. I don't know what that was all about, but there was an Estee Super, okay, and an Alliage Super as well. I think there was an Azure Super, could be wrong. But yeah, that's what that whole thing is about. Now, here is the thing that you need to remember. The eau de toilette concentrate, or haute concentration, or super concentrate in some markets, those are not more powerful versions of the original eau de toilette or the original eau de cologne, if that applies. They are entirely different fragrances. So now, I've explained to you where the concentrate nomenclature comes from. It's a way to avoid saying eau de parfum or parfum for the men's market. But now you need to know why the fragrances themselves exist. Why do they exist? So, a lot of fragrances on the men's market were rather discreet in their sillage. You know, their projection was modest. They could last a good long time, okay, 6 hours, 8 hours on skin, just fine. They're based out very well, but they are still low volume in terms of extroversion, in terms of performance, because in the immediate post-war years, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, when, you know, people had clean-shaven faces and straight haircuts, it was not considered gentlemanly. It was not considered masculine, actually, to have a loud fragrance. It was considered a feminine trait to have a loud fragrance. So a lot of man's fragrances made in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, not so much prior to that. You know, men's stuff in the 20s and the 30s was kind of loud. The original Caron pour un Homme was pretty loud. Eucharist is pretty loud. Mouchoir de Monsieur, again, pretty loud, okay? But once we get into that immediate post-war era, men's tastes wanted dialed down fragrances. So that was the norm. The original Chanel pour Monsieur, a ship, was very, very discreet. The original Monsieur de Givenchy from '59, again, very discreet. A lot of these fragrances into the early to mid 60s were very discreet. All the way up into the early 70s, there were some fragrances being made in the 70s that were not super strong. The original version of Aramis by Estee Lauder. I know Estee Lauder is known for loud fragrances, but the original earliest bottles of Aramis were not super powerful. They were more discreet. Yeah, they had aldehydes and were kind of bloomy, poofy at the onset, but, you know, given 30 minutes time and it manages to dry down, they were pretty discreet fragrances. So suddenly, into the 70s, people were going to discos, dancing it up, getting sweaty. Men wanted more loud, announce me, enter a room. They wanted more projection in their fragrances, and musks were doing that. A lot of spicier things were doing that. So a lot of these designers, but particularly designers, the higher end market, the low end market, the drugstore market, like Brut and stuff, they had loud fragrances because the average Joe wanted to get musked up, you know, like an Anchorman. The guy wanted to get all musked up before going out to the pool hall and hitting on chicks. But in the upper levels of society, that was still a thing you didn't really want to do until the mid-70s came around. And you have stuff like Halston Z14, which was very loud fragrance. Pierre Cardin Pour Monsieur, very loud fragrance. So suddenly a lot of these older fragrances were looking inadequate. So the reaction to that was for the designers to make high octane, to basically make powerhouse versions of these older fragrances. They didn't want to be, again, they didn't want to be flat-footed. They didn't want to be caught unawares, like the SpongeBob, or like the caveman SpongeBob, where he's like this, like that. They didn't want to be caught unawares. So a lot of times the perfume would change significantly in the upgrade version. It wouldn't be the same fragrance. And that's where my point here lies. When you look into a bottle of Monsieur de Givenchy Haute Concentration, it is not the same fragrance as the original 1959 Monsieur de Givenchy. Same thing. You smell a bottle of Monsieur Rochas in the concentrate version. It is different. You smell a bottle of Yves Saint Laurent Pour Homme from 71. Then you smell the Haute Concentration version with the black cap from 83. 2 years after Kouros, by the way. So again, it was kind of a reaction. Kouros, very powerful fragrance, very potent. So they had to make a high-powered version of the first fragrance. But it doesn't smell the same. It is actually significantly different. All of these Haute Concentration, Eau de Toilette Concentré fragrances should be viewed as flankers. That is what they are. They are flankers. If they were released today, if they were released in today's market, they would be called Intense or Elixir or whatever, just like we have Sauvage Elixir. So that is pretty much what that stuff was. You can look at Monsieur Rochas Haute Concentration or like Moustache Eau de Toilette Concentré. You can look at those as the elixirs of their time. That's what they were. They were the upmarket, up-price, extra loud version for the guy who wanted more volume. But the sacrifice is that they smell fundamentally different. I think the closest one is the Moustache, and I prefer that one to the original. The one case where I actually like the concentrated version more than the original, because Edmund Runitska designed the original back in '49, and he was brought back to work on the concentrated version, and he made a truly more concentrated version of the original fragrance. It's a little more sour, a little more sharp, a little more sandalwood, a little more lime, okay, a little more tart, but the basic dry down is actually the same. One for one, the dry down is very, very close. So in that case, I actually like the concentrated version more because it feels more like what it's supposed to be, which is just a higher powered version of the older fragrance. In every other case, though, they are not the same. So Monsieur de Givenchy, different fragrance. The Monsieur Rochas, different fragrance. The YSL Pour Homme, different fragrance. The most glaring difference is going to be that Chanel example, the first one I named. Chanel Pour Monsieur, created by Henry Robert, is a sheep. The Eau de Toilette Concentré, made by Jacques Polge in '89, that's a fougere. It's not even the same structure. The old one is a sheep or a ship, whatever. The new one is a fougere. They are completely unrelated. They have no relation to each other whatsoever, except for maybe petitgrain. They both share petitgrain. There isn't even any lavender, though, in the original Pour Monsieur, because again, it's not a fougere. It doesn't have lavender. So they are not even. They're in different neighborhoods, completely different neighborhoods. Maybe they share a zip code. That's about it. Now let's move on. Now that you know what those are, let's move on to the parfum de toilettes. So the thing is, most of these haute concentrations, Eau de Toilette Concentré, most of those died out, discontinued. Okay, so the YSL, the Givenchy example, the Rochas example, they all died. They are all gone. In some cases, including the original fragrance is gone. So Monsieur Rochas has been discontinued for decades. That's been gone a very long time. Monsieur de Givenchy, I think, was recently discontinued, but you can still get reformulated bottles of it. And Moustache has also been entirely remade. So it's not even the same fragrance either. So in most cases, these are gone. In Chanel's case, they kept them both around, but you can only buy the original version in Europe. So if you live in the United States or Canada, sucks to be you, can't have it. But the Eau de Toilette Concentré was popular enough to stick around, and you can get that today as Eau de Parfum, renamed. Now, the Parfum de Toilette is kind of like the women's version of the Concentré issue. So the thing is, women had Eau de Toilettes already. They were used to them. They knew what they were. Originally, there was nothing above an Eau de Toilette except for the pure Parfum. So there was a gap there. You had your cologne, which is your entry level, splash it on. You had your Eau de Toilette, which came in a spray, usually some kind, whether it's a puffball or a pressurized charge or whatever. And then above that, you had a little tiny bottle of the concentrated perfume, the Parfum X today, whatever you want to call it, all the same thing. There was nothing in the middle. So there wasn't a stronger spray after the toilet. Now, some perfume brands did introduce an Eau de Parfum, but some didn't want to put the Parfum name on a bottle if it wasn't that super concentrated bottle, because the name Parfum was synonymous with small concentrated package. So they didn't want to say Eau de Parfum or perfume water, because that was like brand dilution. Okay, that would make it seem unappealing. So the compromise was Parfum de Toilette. So eau is not in there. See the trick? The word eau is not present. The word water in French is not present. It is perfume de toilette, or toilet perfume, not toilet water, not perfume water. Okay, so it is perfume or parfum that you can spray on to go out and have a party. So you can expect parfum-like performance, parfum-like vivacity, but in a toilet format that you can spray on, splash on. It's not a little tiny thing with a glass rod or whatever, or a little glass stopper. It was a stopgap solution. Of course, as time went on, all of those became Eau de Parfum too, just like all those Eau de Toilette concentrates and stuff, they became Eau de Parfum. Well, so did all the Parfum de Toilettes. All of those things kind of just converged into Eau de Parfum. Just made more sense. It was easier, okay? And that is just about it. That is the whole nomenclature issue. So the big takeaway here is that a lot of these non-standard phrases were invented to tiptoe around customers' delicate sensibilities. All of these things are basically brands walking on eggshells. Okay? Men's cologne was brands walking on eggshells. Eau de Toilette Concentré, brands walking on eggshells. Parfum de Toilette, brands walking on eggshells, trying to avoid insulting or confusing the customer. One last one, which is very unique, okay, is the whole Jean Patou thing with Eau de Mixte and the Avon thing with cologne mist or perfume roller. So the thing was, Jean Patou used to do a thing where you could buy a perfume base and then sling the oils into the base and create a custom perfume, or just use the base to put one perfume in and create like an Eau de Toilette version of that perfume if you wanted, okay? They did it with Colony and a handful of other older fragrances. So that became known as Eau de Mixte, and you could buy these pre-made. So your favorite old Patou fragrance could be bought pre-made as an Eau de Mixte, or you could buy the little set, and then you could mix it yourself. It's a similar thing to what we have now with the Alchemist's Garden that Giorgio Armani does, where you have the pure oils and then the cologne base, and you bash them together and make a fragrance. That's kind of what the Eau de Mixte was, but it was the Jean Patou version of that, and it was like a century ago, 30s, 40s. Now, the cologne mist thing was basically just Avon's way of saying spray fragrance. Since most of their fragrances that were not pure oils, okay, they had pure oils and they had pure parfums, but if it wasn't a parfum and it wasn't an oil, it was a cologne usually. If it was a higher alcohol concentration, They didn't use toilet. They didn't use the word toilet. Neither for women or men. Neither one got toilet. It was either cologne, cologne mist, or the perfume, and that's it. So the mist is just the sprayable version. And usually a cologne mist was also pressurized. So if you ever see an old Avon that has a spray head on it, like from the 50s, from the 60s, and it says cologne mist, that is a pressurized spray. Be careful, because when you push that down, whoosh, it's not going to come back up by itself either. You got to let go of it. It's like a can of aerosol, basically, but in a glass version. It's a glass aerosol, just letting you know. And then the whole perfume roller is basically just an attar. It's a makhalat. It's a perfume oil with a little roller ball on it. Because Avon wasn't going to go slinging around words like attar or auto or makhalat, because your average like 1950s suburban Karen type of person was not going to know what a makhalat was, not going to know what an attar was. That would probably scare them, actually. What is this gibberish on this bottle? Oh, I'm too American for this nonsense. So a perfume roller is just easier. You know, and the super cologne, ultra cologne, all that garbage, you know, I've already been over that. So there you go, guys. Those are your non-standard and mostly retired non-standard concentrations. If you have any more questions, anything I missed, please let me know. I can answer it in the comment section. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you next time.